But I said, "Sir, where is the special planning group?" And he said, "You are the special planning group. It's wherever you put it." Well, I was born in Corpus Christi, Texas, but I was raised all over the country. My father was in the Marine Corps.
And so
I never planned to be a Marine, but one thing led to another.
well, let's talk about that. What led to that?
Well, I enlisted in the Marine Corps after a fight with my father in the summer of 1964, and I stayed in the reserves and went back to school, and then the war heated up, Vietnam, and I thought I would do my thing. And the Marine Corps decided to commission me, so I went from sergeant to second lieutenant and went off to Vietnam, and one thing led to another after that. 34 years later, I retired.
Did your father, who was the Marine, not want you to join the Corps?
I don't know what his real attitude was on it, but it was a good thing that we had that we became very close later, but it was time to break loose.
Now, when you were deployed to Vietnam, your first tour began in 1968.
Right.
As a platoon commander. What did that entail?
Interestingly enough, I was an infantry officer, but parachute qualified, and I was assigned an armored platoon, tanks and Amtracs and some howitzers mounted on Amtracs, with the Marine Corps. With the ROK Marine Corps, Republic of Korea Marine Corps Blue Dragon Brigade. Mm-hmm. And it was a very interesting tour, and we got in a lot of combat with them, supporting the ROKs against the NVA south of Da Nang and near Hoi An, Vietnam.
And obviously, your deployment in 1968, that's a very sensitive time in the war. You're right after the
TED.
Well,
it was after TED in 68, 69, right.
Right. And so what was the attitude, the mood, the urgency at the time that you deployed?
Well, TED is vastly misinterpreted. When I arrived in Vietnam, basically the U.S. forces had cleaned out the enemy in TED. Because what happened, of course, was that the North Vietnamese encouraged the Viet Cong to rise. The Viet Cong rose and became very visible, and most of them were killed. Mm-hmm. It was interpreted very differently back in the United States. It was very hard to understand that when you were over there, or explain it to the young Marines. But we were still very well engaged all over the country in 1969. And I came back to Hawaii to the 1st Marine Brigade from there when I finished that tour.
Talk about your interaction both with the Dragon Brigade
mm-hmm.
and as a platoon commander. What type of combat did you see at that point?
Well, we were both mounted and dismounted. Mounted times, I usually broke the platoon into two sections, let the platoon sergeant take one out, and I took the other one out to support the Korean Marine Corps in their operations. We had 6 tanks, 10 troop-carrying amphibious tractors, Amtracs, and 6 tractors that really didn't move because we couldn't get any parts for them, that had howitzers assigned on them, so they were kind of a stationary artillery battery, which of course I had no idea how to employ, so I had to learn that in a hurry too. Nor did I know anything about tanks or Amtracs, so I had to learn a lot there. You got to wonder sometimes how you get assigned to these duties. Anyway, it was a very exciting tour during which I learned a great deal.
How quickly did you learn the things you had to learn?
Probably not quickly enough, but we did well, and I guess I did well largely because of patience on the part of staff NCOs and some very good NCOs, and I had some very good training from the Marine Corps before I went over there.
How would you describe the quality of soldiering first of all, on our side, of the men that you led?
They were superb. They were absolutely superb. Despite Jane Fonda and some of the others, they were great. And the casualties were pretty heavy in that war. But yeah, they were great. Taught me how to cook rice, among other skills.
And what did you notice about the enemy?
They were also the North Vietnamese Army, the NVA as we call them, is who we were fighting. The Viet Cong had been eliminated basically in Tet. But the NVA was another story. They were very, very good, and they were artists with tunnels. I remember once one tunnel was 8 stories deep into the ground with meeting rooms and a hospital and all kinds of other things. Remarkable, and their sappers were also amazing. Sappers were highly trained, usually very small guys who would slip through the wire and blow holes in and try to penetrate your perimeters. They were a respected enemy.
How did you adapt to the tunnel systems?
Well, we had these tunnel rats, very small guys who had the courage and could fit to go out down the tunnels. I tell you, my hat is off to them to this day. I think it took great courage to do that. I wasn't personally involved in more than a couple of tunnels, but some units ran into networks of them. The area had, also mines were a problem. The area had been mined in the 30s by the Viet Minh in their fight against the French. Then it had been mined again in the early 50s. And it was mined a third time, of course, when we were fighting. So there were a lot of mines at various locations, and we never carried Marines inside the armored tractors. We put them on top with 3 layers of sandbags, and it was a court-martial offense to carry them inside because of the mines. And in those days, the amphibian tractors had gasoline in their bellies, so the mines had to blow through the gas. And what happened was, I would stand, the platoon commander would stand in one hatch, standing on the chair, and the tractor commander would stand in the other one, and the air bubble would shoot us out like large, slow mortar rounds when we hit a mine. And we hit several mines. Got a bunch of punctured eardrums. That was the only thing that happened to me in the entire tour, was eardrums and the typical cellulitis infections from the the tropical diseases.
How would you describe the situation compared to when you came on your first tour and to when you left?
Well, when I left, we were beginning to draw down, just beginning to draw down in '69. And so it wasn't radically different. The Blue Dragons were still there, and they were still fighting. The NVA was still there. They're still fighting us, but we were beginning to draw down. There was no question about it. And of course, that was the lead up to the Paris Peace Conference, which a year and a half or 2 later ended up basically abandoning the South Vietnamese.
Then, after your first tour,
yes, I came back to the U.S. The Marine Corps thought I needed to be schooled again, so they decided to send me to school again, to the Amphibious Warfare School. And well, I was a platoon commander and then a company commander in 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines in Hawaii. And we had to there was quite a bit of training to do there, and then they sent me to school. And then I volunteered and went back to Vietnam.
Now, in your second tour, I guess the first tour could be described as more conventional. The second tour was much less conventional.
Yes, you could say that. The second tour was less conventional. I went back to Southeast Asia the second time in the late summer of 1974. And my job was to, as the commander for field operations, I had in the search and the resolution of the MIA cases. We had several thousand MIA cases that hadn't been resolved. Remains hadn't been found. And in some cases, there were some sightings of apparently live prisoners. It was not clear. So we were engaged in that. I had an Army Special Forces team of about 50 guys, terrific, unbelievably terrific guys. Some of the finest fighters I've ever seen in my life. A small Navy intelligence det and an Air Force medical det. And of course, there were no U.S. facilities of any kind, and there were no U.S. forces of any kind in Vietnam. it was completely different. And it was difficult to hold your head up because despite our pledges that had convinced the South to agree to the Paris Peace Treaty, we were abandoning all support of the South Vietnamese armed forces. And it was so bad that in some cases the artillery batteries had 1 round per day for 6 guns. There were dozens and dozens and dozens of vehicles as each time you would arrive at a unit parked, no parts. Gasoline was scarce, and we were systematically, after President Nixon's resignation, Congress decided to abandon Vietnam, and so they cut off aid, despite President Ford's requests. So the South Vietnamese regarded us as honorable allies, but it was very hard to hold your head up.
I was going to go back to the clandestine work and resolving the MIA cases. We've got about a minute left in this segment. How did you actually resolve them?
Well, there had been an ambush. The process was open until December of 1974. That is, we tabled where we were going to go and what we were going to do to the 4-Power Joint Military Commission, which included the enemy, the North Vietnamese. And so that was agreed to in the Paris Accords. And however, in December of 1974, just before I went over there, they ambushed the American team, killed the captain team leader, and wounded several others. And so from then on, we never tabled any more operations. And the skirmishing continued in Vietnam, and what I would do is I had to negotiate with the hill tribes and others where we would go in for security, because the popular forces, which they frequently offered us, were really pretty well useless. They were just villagers armed. You know, it's not that they didn't care, it's just they weren't trained. So I would negotiate, and I spent a lot of time in the hills and got a lot of parasites out of that eventually caught up with me.
And you were just talking about how as 1974 turned into 1975, not only had the Paris peace talks occurred and the U.S. was, in your words, abandoning the South Vietnamese.
We had left South Vietnam in 1972. There were no U.S. forces of any kind in the country. The situation was we had a mission, which is what the U.S. calls its combination of civilians and military, diplomat, and business supportive anywhere in the world. The mission was probably 25,000 strong in Saigon of civilians, and 50 military officers were allowed by the Paris Peace Accords, and they were all very senior, and they were part of the Defense Attaché Office, DAO, Major General Homer Smith, wonderful man, great leader. And so I went forward. I turned 29 in November of 1974, and we went forward. We were operating out of Thailand in the search for the resolution operations for the MIAs, and we went forward to Vietnam, to Saigon, right after my birthday, when I turned 29 in November. And we did that because the Jolly Green helicopters that we were using for insertion and extraction left Thailand at that point. They were the last U.S. Military operation capable outfit that would take us into Vietnam and for insertion and extraction. And from then on, in a development that turned out to be critical, we operated with Air America, the CIA's airline, piloted by terrific retired Army or former Army warrant officers, mostly civilians now, and their small Hueys. And we flew with them almost exclusively for insertion and extraction for those operations. So we were operating out of Saigon in Vietnam on Air America helicopters. But there were no U.S. forces in the country, and the senior staff that was in Saigon was it. And of course, they were essentially managing the logistic support of ARVN, such as it was, ARVN being the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. A lot of skirmishing was going on. And then, of course, it didn't take long. A month later, in December, the NVA attacked South Vietnam, despite the Paris Peace Accords, from their sanctuaries in the west across the border, and took the provincial capital of Phu Quoc. And as I say when I tell the story occasionally around the country, it was a test and we failed it. It didn't take very long. The second week in March, they attacked Ban Mi Tu, a key highway intersection in the west, and Con Tum and Pleiku were put at risk, and an entire South Vietnamese corps collapsed because they were then trapped. And one thing led to another, and it was the beginning of the end. And from March the 13th until April the 29th was, you could count the days until 50-some days were left for South Vietnam.
But you had already essentially been tasked with coming up with an evacuation plan even before those.
In the 1st of March, General Smith, I to this day don't know how he made the decision to do this, because he had, a whole staff of very senior officers. At any rate, I came in from the field and I was ordered to report to General Smith. I did. I'd never seen a major general before. And wonderful Virginia boy, a great officer, just a terrific leader. And he had that soft Virginia accent, and he said, "Captain Wood, do you know why you are here?" And I said, "No, sir." He said, "You are here because I ordered you here." I said, "Yes, sir, I knew that." And anyway, he said, "You are going to join the Special Planning Group." And I didn't open my mouth anymore. And he went on for a few minutes and said, "Everything you do will be secret. You will have to clear it with me." And he said, "Do you have any questions?" I had probably 200. But I said, "Sir, where is the Special Planning Group?" And he said, "You are the Special Planning Group. It's wherever you put it." That's literally what he said. And so we went down to this bunker. George Petrie, who is an incredible Army Special Forces hero, was my deputy and my friend. And so it was the two of us, and we joined one Marine Major, Jim Saboteur, and we were the Special Planning. So we just called ourselves the SPG since he said we were a Special Planning Group, And we found a bunker deep in the depths of the former MAC-V compound they called the Pentagon East. Huge complex directly across from the Tan Son Nhut Air Base. Very important fact, because it plays later into what happened. And we began, so what's the mission? Well, he said, you are going to evacuate urban Saigon, or more precisely, you are going to develop a plan for the evacuation of the center of the city. And we went back and sat down. Of course, we had a million questions, but none of us had ever been in an evacuation before. None of us had ever been in a special planning group before. And so we sat down and we said, okay, we have to figure out who we're going to evacuate, how many. Critically, we have to figure out what's going to happen here in this city, and we have to figure out what the assets are. It's important to understand the unique situation because it's hard to believe. The ambassador, Graham Martin, had forbidden any overt effort at all to prepare for evacuation initially. None was permitted. So our ability to plan had to all be done in absolute secrecy. And we then asked what the assets would be, and over a period of weeks, one decision after another led to the fact that no Marines would be put in to help secure the Defense Attaché office compound where we were, and where we were building in secret an internment camp for 10,000 for 10 days. Why? Because we weren't sure that the NVA would let us wait long enough to get a plan together. There was no guarantee, in my mind at least, that we had 30 days, 40 days, whatever we thought we had. And that's all we thought we had. So that was being done in secret, and that was the beginning of the volunteers, which is the whole point of this story, the real heroes. We recruited about 12 or 15 American civilians, secretaries, accountants, one who was a lieutenant general equivalent, Bill Austin, the area auditor for Southeast Asia. And they began helping us build Project Alamo, which was the internment camp in secret inside the DAO compound. And of course, all this is in secret from most of the DAO staff, too. And then the ambassador started making one decision after another. These all didn't occur. First of all, there would be no security provided for the DAO compound beyond the 12 Marines that we had. Then the next decision he made was there would be no Marines in the city of Saigon during the actual evacuation. And of course, the question that hit me immediately was, well, how do we secure the convoy? Our plan included a bus convoy. So we had been developing a plan that essentially worked in two prongs. We would operate on 8 routes named after the famous western trails of the United States, Oregon, Texas, California, so forth. And they would be buses, which we would armor somehow. We weren't sure how we were going to armor the buses, but we were going to armor them. And we were going to armor them in such a fashion that nobody would notice they were armored. Didn't know how to do that either, but we were going to figure it out. This was the plan, okay? Plans are great. Then you have to do them. Then those men and women, Vietnamese, third country nationals for whom we had legal responsibility, the U.S. does all over the world, and, of course, Americans, that we were going to pick up, we would pick them up on 18 or 20 designated pickup points that were special buildings. And those buildings would have helicopter landing zones prepared on their roofs, which Marine Corps helicopters would then land on. Then another shoe fell. No Marine Corps helicopters would be allowed to land in the city, except at the embassy. So, remember that I mentioned to you, we had been operating with the Air America. Mm-hmm. I went to Air America, and I held a long meeting with the volunteers. We now had about 100 volunteers by the end of March, working on all kinds of things, and including working with Air America to create HLZs on the roofs of those buildings. All 26 Air America pilots volunteered to stay with the volunteers we had and to evacuate from the rooftops, which in the end they did. Well, at that point, the North Vietnamese at the end of March attacked from the north simultaneously in Quang Tri. Quang Tri fell, and in rapid succession, Hue fell, and then Da Nang. Da Nang falling is like Chicago falling in the United States. That's the impact it had on the country. Now, tens of thousands of Vietnamese are fleeing south towards Saigon. Tens of thousands, clogging the roads, troops can't move, and the NVA is coming in from the west and from the north. And they're attacking, and Arvin is having a terrible time and falling back, mostly because of lousy leadership. So, at this point, we go into override day and night. And when Da Nang falls, the South Vietnamese government in Saigon declares martial law. It affects a curfew and puts barricades up all over the city. Well, this is a huge problem because we are planning convoys on routes. So every night, one of us has to run the barricades, and we have silenced weapons because if we have to shoot, we're going to have to shoot national police, South Vietnamese national police at the barricades if we get into a fight. So every night we do that, and then in the morning, more than once, breakfast, I hate to say it now, it's a poor example, was scotch and a cigarette, but it was. And so the volunteers, about 100 of them, are by the last part of March, are busily engaged. They're installing flak jackets in the buses and stationing buses in groups in these specially prepared stops. During the day, the buses operate normally, and nobody notices these flak jackets that are bolted underneath the windows as protection. You know, and there's mesh in the windows, but that doesn't show up a lot. They're up there. The Pacific Architects and Engineers, a great outfit, builds all kinds of special barricades that will close off the stairwells in these buildings. Because we know from the cities that we fell with, we went up to several cities, George Petrie and I, and we knew how Saigon would fall. It would be horrible rioting. There would be arson, barricades, shooting, and all of which and more did in fact occur. So we had to be able to close off the route to the helicopter landing zones that were going to get people on the roofs once the convoys couldn't get any more. And then in the meantime, others, volunteers, strung wire inside the huge water tower at DAO and made a giant antenna. And we put those small Motorola radios you've seen in taxi cabs. Mm-hmm. Those were in all the buses. That's how we controlled the evacuation of Saigon, was in those little tiny Motorola radios. But it worked. The drivers for the buses got to drive the buses 1 foot forward and 1 foot back, and to see how to change gears, because everything had to be done in secret. Then on April the 3rd was about the worst day of my life. Operation the Baby Lift had begun, and the U.S. government flew in a giant C-5A transport and put 300 orphaned infants on board, and 30 of the finest women in DAO volunteered to take it out, about 20 of whom were from the volunteers, our volunteers. The C-5A took off, and at 2,500 feet it had explosive decompression. It blew its doors open. They went through the tail and the ailerons. There was no control to the bird after that. And this young airman, the captain, whoever was flying that airplane, by an incredible act of airmanship, using just the engines, was able to get it. He couldn't make Tan Son Nhut. He couldn't get back to Tan Son Nhut. He could see he wasn't going to make it. He put it down in the rice paddies instead of in the city, where it would have killed hundreds. And of course, almost everybody in the aircraft was killed, I think, except 5 people, including the volunteers. So when you have a blow like that, you immediately get everybody together. And I called a meeting and locked the doors, because our meetings were secret, because nobody was supposed to know all this was going on. And I said, here's the situation. There won't be any Marines in the city. I have a plan to secure the convoys, but we'll have no armed defense. The roadblocks will be up. There's likely to be mutinying and other things. And I know after the deaths this morning of 20 of your friends that you're wondering whether this is worth your life. And I said, anybody that doesn't show up tomorrow, we will not hold it against you. We understand. Well, at that point, a little tiny lady in the front row said, Captain, do you think we'll get out? Well, now the rubber really met the road. Here it was. And everybody in that room looked up, because it was the question on everybody's mind. You know, I just told them that they don't have any security, that we're going in anyway. And it was a terrible decision to make. But I don't know what the alternative was. And because the ambassador had forbade. So I answered her, I said, I don't think we will all get out, which is the truth. I just didn't know how many would. But I didn't think we would all get out. It just didn't seem like the odds were in favor of it. Right. So we went on, and a week later, Brigadier General Bond, who is Major General Smith's deputy and is in charge of the final evacuation planning, holds a meeting. Right after which he is arrested by Marines sent from the embassy, by the ambassador, and flown out of the country in the middle of evacuation planning in April, less than 2.5 weeks before Saigon fell. And the ambassador has found out that General Bond sent a message requesting 1 company of Marines to guard this huge compound that we've got. We have 12 Marines to guard this whole compound. They're throwing babies over the wire. The Marines are running and grabbing and catching the babies because the South Vietnamese women are panicking and they want their kids to get out. It's a very bad situation. And their national police are harassing people going in and out of the Americans going in and out. So we needed some security. So he sent a message. Well, the ambassador relieved him of duties, arrested him, and flew him out of the country, and we never saw General Bond again. After that, we not only were secret, we went subterranean, okay? And we went into high gear. And we were working day and night to get ready for it. And so the plan was that we would fly people using Air America helicopters into the DAO compound adjacent to Tan Son Nhut Air Base. and we would pick them up in the convoys and bring them in there. And from there, they would be taken across to Tan Son Nhut, where big Air Force fixed-wing transports would take them out. On the 28th, the North Vietnamese rockets landed all over Tan Son Nhut Airborne and on the DAO compound. One of them landed on the gate, killed both of our Marine Guards that were stationed together and blew the gate up, and the rest of the rockets landed on Tan Son Nhut. Most of the aircraft were burning on the runways, and Tan Son Nhut is now closed. The day before the evacuation is going, 13 North Vietnamese divisions have surrounded Saigon, and the fighting you can hear everywhere in the city. And see, nobody in Saigon had heard a shot fired in 7 years. Well, now you could. At any rate, so Tan Son Nhut's out of the question. General Smith takes the ambassador there and finally convinces him on the 29th that he has to surrender control to the military and it's time for the evacuation to go down. So he orders White Christmas plate on the radio, which is the signal, and the buses roll. Not a volunteer missed it. They got in the buses, and our secret plan, I had 40 taxi cabs painted in a warehouse in National Police colors with revolving blue lights on the top and Venetian blinds in the windows. This was the bluff. This was why it was such a terrible decision, but I didn't know what else to do. So I put National Police cars at each end of each stick of buses. And they had an American guide and a Vietnamese driver in them, and they were in National Police helmets, even with the decals on them. In other words, we had 40 fake National Police cars, and everybody was scared to death of the National Police in Saigon. And I hoped that by creating these fake National Police cars, leading the convoys, that we would buy ourselves some time and get a lot. As it is, they made 4 full circuits of the convoys before most of the buses were being shot up pretty bad. And I was in the city with my driver until 10 o'clock. And at 10 o'clock or thereabouts, they flipped our Jeep over in one of the riots at a bus stop, and we made it into one of the buses, and from then on we controlled whatever we could control from that bus, because the rioters had pretty well, and we were the only Marines in the city. Air America now is operating from the rooftops, landing with their Hueys. And that famous shot you see of the people going up, that's an Air America Huey, not a military Huey. And the Air America Hueys are landing on the 16 or 17 HLZs on the roofs, taking off the people that can't make it to the buses. And the buses are picking up our Vietnamese employees, thousands of it. Well, they picked up about 4,500 people in the buses and another 1,300 or so off the rooftops. So Air America loses their base of operations because it's at Tan Son Nhut and it's hit by artillery and rocket fire. And they start refueling in the street in front of Tan Son Nhut, and they fly out to sea and land on the Navy carriers. You know, you ought to hear the stories about how the Navy greeted them. Anyway, and we had been flying out to the Navy carriers at night in Air America helicopters. Why at night? We had to do it in secret from the embassy so the ambassador wouldn't find out. It's true. It's incredible, but it's true. And so that's how we coordinated with the Marine Brigade at sea. And on the afternoon of the 29th at 1500, the largest helicopter operation in history began, because Tan Son Nhut was closed. And 534 sorties later, at midnight, they finished evacuating the Tan Son Nhut compound that we had prepared in case of internment. And the bus convoys rolled until dark, and then Air America rolled until a little after that. But the Marine lift continued, bringing the thousands out of the compound until midnight. And that was under General Carey and later Commandant of the Marine Corps, Al Gray. And George Petrie and I flew out in one of their helicopters at about midnight. Now, the embassy was not evacuated fully until the next morning. But they were not part of, the ambassador, of course, wouldn't have allowed them to be part of the evacuation plan. So that's the story of the incredible number of volunteers. And those volunteers went home, never even got a thank you note, despite being nominated by us for everything. And my shame is, it never occurred to me when I left And when I was ordered to Hawaii later to write the after-action report as part of that team, it never occurred to me that our nominations wouldn't go through, so I didn't save the names of the listing or anything. And years later, I found out they hadn't gotten anything and hadn't even been thanked. 20 of them died, and the rest of them did an incredible job, and they were 55 to 60 years old. They were veterans, though, mostly veterans. I think a couple of the women were also veterans. And what an astonishing group of people. And that's the evacuation of Saigon, or at least one part of it.
Wow. Sir, it's an incredible story. I have nothing else to add to that. You've told it perfectly. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.